A small town, a young woman with a bright future, a jealous obsession that turned deadly. On a quiet November night, a brutal crime would shock an entire nation. Chantel Rowe was just 16 years old when her life was stolen in a crime so violent, so chilling, it left even seasoned detectives speechless. But she wasn't the only victim. Her parents, Andrew and Rose, suffered the same fate at the hands of one man, Jason Downey. Fueled by jealousy, Downey's obsession with Chantel spiraled into a night of horror. But what he didn't expect was the relentless pursuit of justice that followed. Blood-stained shoes, a twisted trophy, a calculated confession. As the evidence stacked up, one disturbing truth became clear. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was premeditated murder. A trial that exposed the dark mind of a killer, a family left shattered, and a town that would never be the same. This is the story of betrayal, obsession, and justice. This is the Kapunda Triple Murder. In 2010, Kapunda was a town where everyone knew their neighbors, and life moved at a slower, more peaceful pace. Among its residents was the Rowe family, who had built a happy and stable life in the community. Andrew Rowe, the family's patriarch, was born in England in 1965. When he was just 3 years old, his parents made the life-changing decision to move to Australia, settling in Adelaide. Andrew grew up in the suburbs, known for his warm personality and love of fishing with his father. His easygoing nature made him well-liked by everyone who met him. As a young man, he met Rose, a vibrant and cheerful woman just a year younger than him. Their connection was instant, and before long, they were inseparable. In 1985, they married in an intimate ceremony surrounded by loved ones. A couple of years later, their family grew with the birth of their son, Christopher, in 1987, followed by their daughter, Chantel, in 1994. The Rowes built a successful carpet cleaning business, providing them with financial stability. By 2010, Christopher had moved out and was living with his girlfriend nearby, while 16-year-old Chantel balanced school with her part-time job at a local cafe. That year, however, Chantel faced an unexpected challenge. She discovered she was pregnant. Despite the difficulties ahead, she remained determined to build a future for her child with the unwavering support of her boyfriend, Dylan. Life in the Rowe household carried on as usual until the night of November 7, 2010. What happened that night would become one of the most brutal crimes the region had ever seen. Sometime after midnight, an intruder broke into the Rowe home, carrying out a massacre so violent that even the most seasoned detectives from Adelaide were left shaken. The crime scene was a nightmare. Blood covered the floors, walls, and ceiling, yet it took 2 days before anyone realized something was horribly wrong. Concerned neighbors, noticing the eerie silence and lack of movement from the Rowe home, decided to check in. Peering through the windows, they stumbled upon a horrific sight. Inside, Andrew and Rose lay lifeless in the kitchen, their bodies brutally mutilated. In her bedroom, Chantel was found murdered in an even more disturbing manner. Each family member had suffered multiple stab wounds in a savage and merciless attack. Christopher, away on vacation in Queensland with his fiancée, first heard whispers of a crime in his hometown through social media. Desperate for answers, he scoured Facebook, hoping his family wasn't involved. At first, he was reassured that his parents weren't among the victims, but that false sense of relief didn't last long. When police finally contacted him, his worst fears were confirmed. The autopsy would later reveal chilling details. Andrew had been stabbed 29 times, Rose over 50, and Chantel 33. But the horror didn't end there. Chantel had also been assaulted before her murder, making the crime even more disturbing. Investigators first looked at Christopher, the only surviving member of the Rowe family. However, Christopher was on vacation in another city, nowhere close to his family home. He was quickly ruled out. His frantic attempts to contact his family and a solid alibi placed him thousands of miles away when the murders occurred. With Christopher cleared, detectives faced a chilling question. Who could have committed such a brutal crime? The Rowes had no known enemies. By all accounts, they were well liked and had never been involved in any conflicts. So why would someone target them so viciously? The case took an even darker turn when investigators uncovered something truly unsettling. The killer hadn't fled in panic after the murders. Instead, they lingered. Evidence suggested the perpetrator had changed into clean clothes and even lay down on Chantel's bed. Bloodstains and drag marks showed that she had tried to hide, only to be pulled from her hiding place. The detectives ruled out robbery as a motive. Nothing had been taken. Valuables, including electronics and cash, remained untouched. The sheer violence of the attack suggested either a deeply personal grudge or the work of someone with a disturbingly cruel nature. Some parts of the crime scene appeared to have been wiped clean, indicating a failed attempt to cover up the evidence. Bloody footprints led toward the front door but suddenly stopped, as if the killer had deliberately removed their shoes and walked out in socks to avoid leaving more traces. Yet, the most unsettling discovery was that there were no signs of forced entry. This suggested one of two possibilities. Either the murderer was someone the family knew and trusted, or they had found another way inside without drawing attention. As investigators examined the gruesome crime scene, they discovered that while Andrew and Chantel had suffered horrific fates, Rose had endured the most. She had been stabbed more than 50 times, far more than the others. The reason? She had survived the initial attack. In a desperate attempt to get help, she managed to make a phone call before the killer realized she was still alive. But before she could escape, the murderer returned, stabbing her repeatedly until she was silenced forever. With this grim reality setting in, detectives turned their attention to possible suspects. Andrew and Rose had no enemies, no financial troubles, and no known disputes that could have led to such a brutal crime. That left only one possible motive: Chantel. At just 16 years old, Chantel had been balancing school and a part-time job while preparing for the unexpected arrival of her baby. Her boyfriend, Dylan, had supported her throughout, standing by her side as they planned for their future. They had been together for a year, attending the same school and imagining the life they would build together. Dylan, also 16, seemed like an unlikely suspect, but the police needed to be thorough. They questioned him, checked his alibi, and searched for any reason why someone might have wanted to harm Chantel or her family. Dylan was cooperative from the start. Devastated, he spoke openly about his love for Chantel, their dreams of raising their child together, and how the news of her murder had shattered him. His alibi was airtight. He had been attending his grandfather's anniversary in another city, with dozens of witnesses confirming his whereabouts. With Dylan ruled out, the investigation hit another frustrating dead end. Still, the police had one powerful advantage: the killer's DNA. Forensic teams collected critical evidence, including seminal fluid, which had the potential to identify the killer. However, when investigators ran it through the national database, no matches were found. The perpetrator had no prior criminal record. Then, another crucial detail emerged. The murder weapons had come from the Rowe family's kitchen, suggesting the attack may not have been premeditated, but rather an explosive, frenzied outburst. To make matters worse, the killer had taken the knives, eliminating a key piece of evidence. The estimated time of death was placed between midnight and 2 a.m. A neighbor later admitted to hearing a scream for help around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud. Assuming it was just a domestic dispute, they never called the police. With few clues and no clear suspects, investigators turned to the public, hoping for a breakthrough. Tips poured in, but most led to dead ends, wild theories, hoaxes, and speculation. Then, just as the case seemed to stall, Dylan recalled something that made detectives freeze. The night before her murder, Chantel had been feeling unwell. She called her boss to let them know she wouldn't be coming to work the next day. At exactly 5 a.m., Dylan sent her a text checking in. His message was read, but never answered. What he didn't know at the time was that Chantel had already been dead for hours. Someone else had read that message. Someone who was still inside the house. Then came the most chilling revelation. The killer had attempted to respond to Dylan's text. However, because Chantel's phone was out of credit, the message was never sent. It was a failed attempt to make it seem as though she were still alive. This disturbing clue shifted the investigation toward Chantel's social circle. Detectives dug deeper, searching for anyone with a possible grudge. That's when they came across Jason Alexander Downey. At just 17 years old, Jason was part of Dylan's school crowd but had barely known Chantel. At first glance, he seemed harmless, thin, quiet, and unassuming. Detectives planned to ask a few routine questions and move on. But as soon as the interview began, Jason's behavior set off alarms. Instead of giving straightforward answers, he became tense and evasive, rambling about being excluded from a party and how everyone around him had a partner except him, details irrelevant to the case. Then, unprompted, he suddenly blurted out that he had an alibi for the night of the murders, despite no one asking. The inconsistencies in his story were glaring. Investigators took his fingerprints and DNA for comparison. Jason complied, appearing calm, too calm. For a moment, they doubted their suspicions. Then, they noticed something: fresh cuts on his palms. When asked about them, Jason claimed they were from a machine shop accident. But the wounds were too clean, too precise, consistent with someone gripping a knife. Forensic experts soon had their answer. The fingerprints on Chantel's bedroom door were an exact match to Jason's. Within 2 days, DNA results confirmed the worst. Jason Downey was the killer. The assumption that the murderer had to be physically strong was wrong. Despite his thin frame, Jason had managed to overpower 3 people in a fit of unthinkable rage. Even more disturbingly, he had deceived everyone. He had even attended the Rowe family memorial, placing flowers and pretending to grieve. Born in Scotland, Jason had moved to Kapunda with his mother and older brother. On the surface, his life appeared ordinary, but underneath, something darker was festering. Chantel had never been particularly close to Jason. She was polite but indifferent. She didn't dislike him, but she didn't go out of her way to engage with him either. To her, he was just another person in their group. But for Jason, that indifference twisted into something far more sinister. He had made advances toward her before, only to be rejected. When Jason learned that Chantel was pregnant with Dylan's child, something inside him snapped. The realization that Dylan, not him, was the father sent him into a jealous rage. But it wasn't just about Dylan. It was about control. Jason's growing obsession had already spiraled beyond reason, and on the night of November 7th, his emotions reached a breaking point. What followed would leave an irreversible mark on Kapunda. After his arrest, Jason's unnerving calmness shocked investigators. He denied any involvement, speaking with eerie confidence, as if he could talk his way out of the overwhelming evidence against him. When confronted with his fingerprints at the Rowe home, he claimed they were from a visit weeks earlier, but that was only the first of his lies. Forensic analysis revealed his DNA on Chantel's body. Desperate to explain it away, He concocted a story about an intimate encounter days before her murder. But science doesn't lie. DNA remains viable for only a short time, proving his presence at the scene that very night. As his alibi crumbled, Jason finally broke, revealing the horrifying chain of events. That evening, he had gotten into a heated argument with his mother and stepfather. Frustrated and seething, he left, choosing to sleep in his car. But when Dylan casually mentioned that Chantel was home, sick, and vulnerable, Jason's fixation took a sinister turn. What started as a plan to drive by her house escalated into something far more dangerous. He parked his car at the end of the street, out of sight, and crept toward the row home. The house was dark and silent, except for one thing. The bathroom window was slightly open. Thin and agile, Jason slipped through the gap with ease. He then sat motionless in the bathroom for nearly half an hour, listening, ensuring the house was still. Later, he would claim he only wanted to confess his feelings to Chantel. But if that were true, why did he take a kitchen knife before entering her room? Jason hadn't come for love. He had come for control. The moment he stepped into Chantel's bedroom, she knew something was wrong. She resisted him, and that defiance sent him into a blind rage. Overcome with fury, Jason lost all restraint, grabbing the knife and stabbing her repeatedly in a violent frenzy. The commotion woke her parents, Andrew and Rose, who rushed in to help their daughter. But Jason, fully consumed by bloodlust, turned the knife on them as well, brutally ending their lives. Afterward, he tried to justify his actions as a crime of passion, but the evidence painted a far darker picture. This was no moment of lost control. This was premeditated murder. As the investigation progressed, more damning evidence surfaced. A pair of blood-stained shoes was discovered abandoned in a remote area. Forensic testing confirmed the DNA on them matched all three victims. The sole patterns were identical to the bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Inside the shoes, traces of Jason's sweat provided further proof of his involvement. While he occasionally cooperated with investigators, offering to reveal where he had disposed of the murder weapons, the knives were never found. Authorities suspected he was still trying to manipulate the case, buying time even as the evidence stacked against him. By the fall of 2011, nearly a year after the murders, Jason Downey stood trial. Throughout the proceedings, he remained eerily emotionless, shifting his story multiple times but never displaying genuine remorse. Despite overwhelming forensic proof, he claimed to have no memory of killing the Rowe family. A particularly chilling detail emerged during the trial. After the murders, Jason had taken Chantel's pendant and chain, keeping them as a twisted trophy, a reminder of the girl who had rejected him. At one point, he even suggested that none of this would have happened if Chantel had simply invited him to a party she had hosted before her death. It was clear that his deep-seated resentment had fueled his horrific actions. Throughout the trial, Jason's cold and detached demeanor never wavered. When he finally pleaded guilty, it wasn't out of remorse but as a calculated move to secure a lighter sentence. He later admitted to his brother that the plea was a strategic decision to avoid a harsher punishment. Even seasoned law enforcement officers, accustomed to witnessing brutality, were horrified by the sheer savagery of his crimes. One investigator summed it up plainly. Jason's guilty plea should not be mistaken for regret. His actions were cruel, calculated, and beyond belief. On April 19, 2012, Jason Downey was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Had he not pleaded guilty, he would have faced at least 45 years before eligibility. In a final act of manipulation, he wrote a letter to Chantel's family and friends, claiming he was sorry and accepting his punishment. But between the lines, his words felt hollow, forced. more like a child being told to apologize than a man truly burdened by guilt. For Christopher Rowe, who lost his entire family in one night, no sentence could ever restore what was taken from him. To honor them, he had their names tattooed on his body, a permanent tribute to the parents and sister he would never see again. In an emotional interview, he was unable to speak, leaving his cousin to express the grief that would never fade. My dad, mom, and sister were viciously taken, yet their killer will one day have a chance at freedom. Meanwhile, we, their family, are serving a life sentence of loss? After the tragedy, Christopher left Kapunda, unable to face the painful memories. When he returned, he struggled to resume his old life. Eventually, he took over his father's business, renaming it Rose Choice Carpet Cleaning in honor of his mother's memory, a way to rebuild his future while keeping his family's legacy alive. As for Jason Downey, he remains behind bars in the Moreland Juvenile Detention Center in South Australia, serving his sentence, his own life forever marked by the devastation he caused. Kapunda, once a quiet town, could never shake the shadow of that night. The Rowe home, once filled with warmth and laughter, became a house of silence, standing as a grim reminder of the horror that unfolded within its walls. And Jason Downey? He may have been locked away, but the fear he created, the pain he inflicted, and the lives he shattered would never be forgotten. His name would forever be tied to one of the most senseless and savage crimes in Australian history, because some scars never fade, some wounds never heal, and for those left behind, justice can never bring back what was taken. Thank you for listening to True Crime Pulse. Share your thoughts on the story, like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next episode when we bring you more crime stories from around the world, stay vigilant.